Get comfortable. Settle the pillow, let your shoulders drop, and let the room go quiet around you. Because tonight we are going somewhere that almost everyone remembers wrongly. You have seen the picture? A long house the color of honey, a lawn mown into stripes, women in white walking slowly between the tennis nets with parasols tilted against a sun that never quite gets hot. Somebody is playing croquet badly. Somebody has fallen asleep in a wicker chair with a book face down on his chest. The whole scene seems to have been arranged by nobody in particular, as though a beautiful weekend simply happened, the way weather happens, and all anyone had to do was arrive and be charming. That is not what you are about to walk into. Tonight you are going to spend 3 nights inside an Edwardian country house weekend as a guest. And what you are going to find is not a holiday. It is a machine. It runs on coal carried up back staircases by hand, on rules nobody writes down and everybody enforces, on the labor of perhaps 30 people you will mostly not see, and on a very large amount of money that, in the autumn of 1908, is quietly running out. Every hour of your visit is scheduled. Every garment you brought is a statement. Every conversation you have between now and Monday morning is being read by someone, and you will be reading them back. If you enjoy these long, slow walks through other people's lives, do subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you are listening from and what time it is where you are. I always like knowing how far this voice travels while people are falling asleep. Now, let the room go soft, let your breathing slow, and let us go back. It is a Friday afternoon in October of 1908. The county is one of the quieter ones, roughly 2 hours out of London by rail if the connections behave, which today they have. You have come down from town on the 2:45, changed once at a junction where the refreshment room smelled of scalded milk, and you are now standing on the platform of a branch line station, so small that the station master also handles the parcels, the lamps, and the flower beds, which he has planted in the shape of the railway company's initials. You are 34 years old. You have been married 11 years to a man whose family has held land in another county since the 17th century, which sounds a great deal more comfortable than it is. The land is still there. The income from it is not what it was. Rents have been falling since you were a child, and the estate that was meant to carry your husband's family forever now carries it the way a tired horse carries a rider, still moving, but with everyone aware of the effort. Your husband has not come with you this weekend. He is in Scotland with his brother, on business that is partly business and partly avoidance. So you have come alone, which is to say you have come with your maid, a woman of about 28, who has been with you for 6 years, and who knows more about the true condition of your household accounts than your husband's own agent does. She's standing a few feet away in a dark coat and a plain hat, watching the luggage van, counting. There are 5 trunks. She counts them twice. The air smells of coal smoke, which will follow you all weekend, and which you have long since stopped noticing, except at moments like this, when the engine sits idling and the smell is thick enough to taste. Under that, wet gravel. It rained this morning, and the platform has that particular darkened look, the water standing in the low places between the flagstones. Somewhere behind the station, building a horse shifts its weight, and the harness makes a small sound, leather and brass together. Waiting in the yard is a wagonette from the house. 2 horses, a coachman in the family's livery, and a second man, younger, who is here entirely for the luggage. Neither of them speaks to you beyond a touch of the hat and a murmured confirmation of your name. They know exactly who you are. They were told this morning, along with the arrival time, the number of guests coming on this train, and the order in which the house wishes them delivered. That is the first thing to understand about the weekend you are entering. Nothing about it is casual, and the appearance of casualness is the most expensive thing in it. Consider what has already been done on your behalf before you have so much as sat down. Some weeks ago, an invitation arrived, phrased with such lightness that it might have been an afterthought. Do come to us for the shooting, the 3rd week in October. Quite a small party. Nothing in that sentence is true in the way it presents itself. The party is not small. The date was chosen against the shooting calendar of 4 other houses so that the guns your hostess wanted would be free. The composition of the party was worked out on paper, name by name, over a fortnight, with attention to who has quarrelled with whom, who is looking for a husband for a daughter, who must be balanced against whom at the dinner table, so that the numbers of men and women come out even, and the order of precedence does not produce an awkwardness in the hall. You replied within 2 days, as one does. Your acceptance was entered in a book. From that moment, a chain of small decisions ran outward from your name like cracks in ice. A room was allocated to you, and in the allocation, your exact standing in the household's private estimation was recorded. Though nobody will ever say so aloud, your maid was allocated a bed in the female servants' passage, and a place at a particular table at a particular meal, ranked according to your rank and not her own. The kitchen was told the numbers. The kitchen told the tradesman. The tradesman sent word to the fishmonger in the county town, and the game larder was reckoned up, and the head gardener was asked what he could give from the glass houses in the 3rd week of October, and he said grapes and a few peaches, and made a note and adjusted his heating. All of that so that you might step down from a train and find a wagonette waiting as though by happy coincidence. Here is something worth slowing down for, because it explains the whole institution you are about to enter. The country house weekend, as you are living, it does not exist in 1700. It barely exists in 1840. It is a creation of the railway, and specifically of the fast, cheap, reliable railway of the last 30 years. Before the lines went in, visiting a country house meant a journey of days and a stay of weeks or months, because the travel was too painful to undertake for anything shorter. Guests came in autumn and left at Christmas. The house absorbed them the way a family absorbs a cousin. The train changed the arithmetic. Once a man could leave his office in the city on a Friday afternoon and be handing his hat to a butler in Norfolk before dark, the long visit collapsed into the short one. The Saturday to Monday was born, and the phrase itself is worth noticing, because in the circles you move in, nobody calls it a weekend. Weekend is a word used by people whose work ends on Saturday, which is to say people who work. You come from Saturday to Monday, and the fact that you actually arrive on Friday and leave on Monday morning is one of those small dishonesties that everyone maintains without effort. So the timetable is the true engine of all this. Not the land, not the title, not the shooting. The printed timetable, with its branch line connections and its down trains, is what allows 30 people to converge on a house in the middle of a wet county and disperse again 72 hours later. Your hostess, who would not describe herself as employed in any capacity whatsoever, has read that timetable as closely as a broker reads a share price. The luggage is going up now. Your maid supervises this with an expression of settled pessimism, because she knows what is in the trunks, and she knows what happens to it when a young man in a hurry swings a trunk onto a cart. The 5 trunks contain the whole apparatus of the next 3 days, and we will open them properly when we get you upstairs, because the arithmetic inside them is genuinely astonishing, and it is one of the reasons this weekend costs you more than you can comfortably afford. For now, you take the seat offered to you. The wagonette is not luxurious. It is a working vehicle with a hard bench and a rug across your knees against the damp, and it smells of horse and of the oilcloth folded under the seat. Another guest has come down on the same train. An older woman, travelling with a companion rather than a maid, and you exchange the small remarks that fill the first 3 minutes of an acquaintance. The train was punctual. The weather has been very unsettled. She hopes the ground will not be too soft for the guns tomorrow. Neither of you says anything of substance. Neither of you intends to. This is a warming of the engine. The coachman clicks his tongue, the horses lean into the collars, and the wagonette turns out of the station yard onto a lane hedged high on both sides. Hawthorn gone dark and heavy with berries. The light is already thinking about going. It is not yet 4:30, and the sky has that low, soft, tin-coloured quality that October afternoons have in the English Midlands, where the day does not so much end as gradually stop bothering. You settle back. 3 miles to go. Ahead of you are 3 nights, roughly 10 changes of clothes, 4 dinners, 1 shoot, 1 church service, an unknown number of conversations that will matter more than they appear to, and a departure on Monday morning that will cost you, in coins pressed into palms, rather more than a country curate earns in a fortnight. And you are supposed to find all of it restful. That is the first thing to understand about the country house weekend, and it is the thing the postcards and the paintings will never tell you. There is a great fiction operating here, and everyone in the wagonette believes in it, and the fiction is this: that nothing has been organized, that you have simply been invited into a large, comfortable house where pleasant things happen to occur in a pleasant order, as naturally as weather. Nothing could be further from what is actually true. Every hour of the next 3 days has been planned, in writing, by at least 2 people, and probably 4. Your hostess has spent the better part of a fortnight on it. She has a list. She has, almost certainly, a small notebook or a set of ruled sheets on which she has worked out who is to sleep where and why, and who must not be seated next to whom at dinner on Saturday because of a matter involving a disputed will in 1904. She has consulted her housekeeper about linen, and her butler about wine, and her cook about what can be got at this season, and what will have to come up by rail from London. She has written and received something like 40 letters to assemble the 12 people who will sit down to dinner tonight. And when you compliment her later this evening on how delightfully easy it all is, she will smile and say that the house rather runs itself. That sentence is the whole of Edwardian society in 8 words. The labor is enormous, and the entire social value of it depends on the labor being invisible. A weekend that looks arranged is a failure. A weekend that looks like an accident of good fortune is a triumph. Every woman in this wagonette knows this, and none of them will ever say it aloud. Now, before the house comes into view, there is something worth slowing down for, because it explains why this institution exists at all in this particular decade, and not 100 years earlier. The country house weekend was built by the railway. It sounds reductive to put it that way, and it is nonetheless close to literally true. In the 1700s, a great house filled up with guests for weeks at a time, because getting there took days, and nobody made that journey for a Saturday. Visits were measured in months. A young woman might go to stay with a cousin in the spring and come home at harvest. The road was bad, the coach was slow, the horses had to be changed and paid for, and the whole enterprise was so expensive in time that a short visit made no sense at all. Then the lines went in. By the 1850s, most of the trunk routes existed. By the 1880s, the branch lines had crept out into the counties, into places with 300 inhabitants and a station master who also kept bees. And suddenly, the arithmetic changed completely. A man could leave his office in the city at 2 o'clock on a Friday, be at a country platform by 4:30, shoot on Saturday, go to church on Sunday, and be back at his desk by 10 on Monday morning. His wife could do the same with rather more luggage. That is why the thing is called a Saturday to Monday. Not a weekend. That word exists, but among people who are careful about words, it carries a faint smell of commerce, of a man who works to a timetable and speaks of days off. Your hostess will say Saturday to Monday. So will you. It is a small piece of vocabulary that costs nothing and signals a great deal. And you learned it so long ago that you no longer remember learning it. The railway did something else as well. It made the food possible. This house will serve you fish that was in the sea off Grimsby yesterday afternoon, and hothouse fruit brought up from a Kentish grower, and ice and flowers out of season. The kitchen at the end of that long stone passage is fed by a goods yard 11 miles away, and by a carrier's cart that comes twice a week. Take away the trains, and the whole performance collapses into cold mutton, and whatever the kitchen garden can manage. So when you sit down tonight to 8 courses in a room, with 40 candles in it, remember that you are eating the London and North Western Railway. The house is very old. The way of living in it is about 50 years old and will be over in 10. The lane bends and the hedge falls away, and there is a wall, grey stone, shoulder height, running along beside you for what feels like a considerable time. Then a gate and lodges on either side of it, small square cottages with the same stone and the same chimneys as the great house, so that even the gatekeeper's roof line announces who owns the ground. The lodgekeeper's wife comes out and holds the gate and drops the smallest possible acknowledgement as you pass, and you incline your head, and neither of you looks directly at the other. Inside the gate, the drive changes character. Gravel, well kept, raked. The park opens out on both sides, oaks standing singly in grass, spaced the way a landscape man spaced them in 1760-something, so that a carriage moving up the drive would be shown the house in pieces, then hidden from it, then shown it whole. You are being handled. The approach is a designed experience, and it was designed 140 years ago by someone who understood perfectly well what he was doing to your eye. Deer at a distance, lifting their heads. A sheet of water down to the left with a small stone bridge over the neck of it. And the water is not a natural lake. It was dug. And then the trees stop, and the house. Here is where a description would ordinarily reach for adjectives, and adjectives will not tell you anything useful. So take it in numbers instead. The front you are looking at is roughly 180 feet across. There are 22 windows in the principal face, in 3 tiers, and the glazing bars are painted white, and every one of those panes is cleaned by hand by a housemaid on a set of ladders, working through the house on a rota, so that the whole circuit takes about 3 weeks, and then begins again. There are, if you count the service wing running back to the north, something over 90 rooms. Perhaps 30 of those are what a family would call rooms, and the rest are stores. Still rooms, larders, a lamp room, a brushing room, a gun room, a room for nothing but flowers, and the sleeping quarters of about 28 indoor servants. There are 41 chimneys, and in the last week of October, there will be fires burning in perhaps 18 of them at any given moment. And every one of those fires is coal that a man has carried up from a cellar in a scuttle weighing about 30 pounds when full. That is the house. Not beautiful exactly. Impressive in the way that a large machine is impressive. And it is best to think of it as a machine, because it is one. And this evening you become a moving part in it. The drive curves for the last 200 yards, and you have those 200 yards to do the sum you have been putting off since Marylebone. 12 at dinner. You know 6 of the names already, because your hostess mentioned them in her letter, which is precisely why she mentioned them. There will be a cabinet minister's wife, which means the talk on Saturday will bend toward the naval estimates and toward Ireland. And you should have read the leading article in this morning's paper more carefully than you did. There will be an unmarried daughter of 19 being shown discreetly to 2 men in their 30s, and everyone will pretend not to see the machinery. There will be a woman with rather more money than you, who dresses in Paris, and against whom your 4 dinner gowns will be measured on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, without a single word ever being spoken about it. You rank, you think, about 8th or 9th of the 12. Old name, respectable connection, land that no longer earns what it once did. You will not go in to dinner on the arm of anyone important. Your bedroom will not be on the best corridor. Neither of these things is an insult, and both of them are information. And by tomorrow evening, every person in the house will have read that information correctly, without anyone having to explain it. What it will cost you is the part nobody writes down. The dressmaker's bill for this visit has already been paid, and it stands at something over £30, which is a year's wages for the housemaid who will bring your hot water in the morning. The tips on Monday will come to perhaps £2 in gold and silver, distributed by a code you will have to work out from the size of the house and the length of your stay. Your maid's keep is free, but her railway fare was yours. You are spending on 3 nights of leisure something close to what a country schoolmaster earns in 6 months. You do this because the alternative is not being asked again, and being asked is how your husband hears things about land, and how your children will one day be considered, and how you remain a person to whom the world happens rather than a person to whom it stops happening. The wagonette comes round the last of the curve onto the gravel sweep, and the horses' hooves change note as they come off the drive, and the sound brings the house to life. The door is already open. It was opened when the wagonette was still under the oaks, because someone was watching from a window, and someone else was told. The butler stands 1 pace outside the threshold, not in the doorway, which would be too eager, and not inside it, which would be too grand. Behind him, 2 footmen in the family's livery, matched in height to within an inch, are already moving down the steps toward the luggage before the vehicle has fully stopped. And the choreography begins. You step down, and your hands are empty within 4 seconds. The dressing case goes to the 2nd footman. Your umbrella is taken by someone you do not see. Your maid has already been detached from you and sent round to a side entrance with the trunks, and she will not appear at your side again until she has climbed 2 staircases you will never use. The butler says your name, and it is the correct name with the correct address, and the sound of it tells you that a list was studied this morning, that faces have been described, that the household knew the shape of your visit before you did. He says the hostess is in the hall. He does not say she is expecting you, because that would imply she might be doing something else, and nobody in this house is ever caught doing anything else. Inside, the hall is warm in the way only a house with a great deal of coal is warm. There is an open fire under a stone chimney-piece, large enough to stand in, and the smell of wood smoke over something faintly sweet, chrysanthemums in a copper bowl on the oak table, cut this morning from the glass houses. Your hostess comes forward with both hands out and says something light about the train, and you say something light back about the branch line, and the whole exchange takes 40 seconds and accomplishes a great deal. She has seen your travelling coat. You have seen who else is standing near the fire. Then a housemaid appears at the foot of the staircase, and you are handed upward. She goes ahead of you, and slightly to the side, which is the correct way to lead a guest upstairs. And she does not speak except to say the number of steps at the turn. Up the main flight, along a corridor hung with prints of horses, then up a second, narrower flight, and along another corridor, and then a turn, and then your room. Count the doors on the way. You did. Every woman of your class counts the doors on the way, because the distance from the head of the main staircase to your bedroom door is the single most honest statement anyone in this house will make about your standing in it this weekend. You are on the 2nd floor, in the west corridor, 4 doors along, past the linen cupboard. Not the bachelor's passage, which is a different wing entirely and is meant to be. Not the state rooms on the 1st floor, with their view down the Lime Avenue, which are already assigned to the couple who arrived yesterday, and whose name appears in newspapers. You are respectable. You are wanted. You are not important. All of that is in the 4 doors. The room itself is generous by the standards of any life but this one. A tall sash window facing west over the kitchen garden wall. A 4-post bed with the curtains taken back and tied. The linen turned down in a triangle. A coal fire laid but not lit, because it will not be lit until 4:30, when the housemaid comes round the corridor with the tapers. A washstand with a marble top. A basin and ewer in blue and white. A soap dish and a brass can of hot water standing under a folded towel to keep the heat in, which means somebody carried it up 2 staircases in the last 10 minutes and will carry another before dinner. A writing table with paper, envelopes, blotter, pen, ink, and a small stack of postcards printed with the name of the house, because guests are expected to write, and it would be shabby to make them ask. There is a hip bath, folded behind a screen. There is no bathroom. There is one bathroom on this floor, at the far end, and you will not use it, because using it involves crossing a corridor in a dressing gown at an hour when the corridor is full of men going to breakfast. You will wash in this room, standing on a mat out of that basin, in water somebody brings you 4 times a day. That is worth sitting with for a moment. This house has electric light in the principal rooms, and a telephone in the business room, and a lift for the luggage on the service side. It has an income that supports 40 indoor and outdoor staff, and every drop of hot water that touches a guest's skin this weekend will arrive in a brass can, carried up a back stair by hand, and be carried down again as slops by hand by a woman under 25. Your maid arrives with the first of the trunks, and the hall boy behind her carrying the second. And then the room stops being a room and becomes a workshop. 5 trunks for 3 nights. That figure sounds absurd until you count what is in them. Here is the arithmetic, because it explains nearly everything about your weekend. You will change your clothes 4 times a day. There is the tweed skirt and jacket for the morning, which must be sound enough to walk wet grass in and smart enough to be seen in at breakfast. There is a second morning dress if the weather turns or if the party stays indoors. There is the luncheon dress on Sunday, since Sunday is a different animal. There is the tea gown for 5 o'clock, which is loose, and is the only garment all weekend that does not hurt. There is the dinner dress for Friday, another for Saturday, another for Sunday, because to be seen twice in the same evening gown, in the same house before the same people, is not a crime, but it is noticed. And being noticed for that is worse than not being noticed at all. There is the coat and skirt for travelling, worn today, which will need brushing tonight. There are boots for walking, and shoes for indoors, and slippers for evening. There are hats in their own round tin cases, because a hat cannot be folded. There is the whole underlying architecture, which is a subject of its own, and will get one shortly. There are gloves, in pairs, in numbers, because gloves are worn nearly all the time and are ruined by nearly everything. 24 changes of outer clothing, near enough, for 72 hours. Now put money on it. Your good dinner gown, made in London this autumn, cost between £18 and £25. The tea gown, perhaps 8. The tweeds, 10 to 12 for the coat and skirt together, made by a tailor rather than a dressmaker, because tweed is a tailor's business. Boots, 30 shillings the pair. A hat, £3 to £5 by the time the feathers are on it. The full account for this one weekend's wardrobe, if you had bought all of it new, would run past £100. The housemaid who brought that can of hot water earns between £22 and £28 a year, all found. The kitchen maid below her earns 16. Your evening gown, the one hanging now on the wardrobe door while your maid brushes the shoulders of it, cost more than that girl will be paid between this Michaelmas and next. You know this. That is the part people forget. You are not ignorant of the arithmetic. You are, in fact, the person in the house who knows it most precisely, because you are the one who pays the dressmaker and settles the wages at home and reads the household books on the first of the month. You simply live inside a structure that requires the spending and forbids the mention of it. Your maid works. She lifts each gown out, folded in tissue, and shakes it, and the tissue makes a sound like a small fire. Everything has been crushed by 3 hours of rail and half an hour of wagonette, and everything must be pressed. So she goes down to find the housemaid on this floor, and the housemaid takes her to the housemaid's closet, where the irons are kept and heated. And there she will stand for the better part of 2 hours with a flat iron and a damp cloth, working over silk and voile and velvet, in a room she has never entered before, alongside women whose names she learned 20 minutes ago, and whose exact rank relative to her own she is still working out. Meanwhile, you have nothing to do, and there is a rope by the bed. It is a broad woven bell pull, tasseled, hanging beside the fireplace. Pull it, and a wire runs inside the wall, over a series of small pulleys, down through the floors, and terminates in the servants' passage on a long board, where 30 or so brass bells hang on coiled springs, each with a painted label beneath it. West Corridor 4. The bell rings, and because the spring keeps it swinging for some seconds after the sound has stopped, whoever comes into the passage can see which one is still moving even if they missed the ring. That is the entire genius of the thing, and it is why the springs are there. Below stairs, someone reads the board. If it is a can of hot water, it is the housemaid on that floor. If it is the fire, it is the housemaid too. If it is tea, it goes to the still room. If it is a message to be carried, the footman goes. If it is anything at all after 11 at night, someone who has been awake since 5:30 gets up off a chair and climbs. You pull the rope perhaps 6 times a day without thinking about it. 20 guests pulling 6 ropes a day is 120 journeys up a back staircase, and that is before the fires and the water and the trays that nobody has to ring for, because they arrive by custom at fixed hours. You do not pull it now. You go to the window instead. The kitchen garden lies below inside its brick wall, and the glass houses are running with condensation along the south face, and a man is walking between the frames with a basket on his hip. Beyond the wall, the park goes gold and brown up the slope to a plantation, and the light is already going flat and long the way it does in October. Somewhere under your feet, the house is doing everything at once, and none of it is audible from here, and that silence is the whole point of the architecture. 20 minutes until the dressing bell. You count the party again in your head, and where you sit in it, and what you will say, and to whom, and how much of the weekend has already been decided by 4 doors along a corridor. Leave that window for a moment. Leave the long gold light and the glass houses and the counting, and go back out into the corridor, past the 4 doors, along to the end where the carpet stops. It stops at a line you can see. There is a strip of brass across the boards, and beyond it the floor is bare, scrubbed, and the door at the end is covered in green baize with a row of studs around the edge. That bars is not decoration. It is there to muffle sound, and it does its job so well that you can stand with your hand on it and hear nothing at all from the far side, though behind it at this hour there are perhaps 30 people working at speed. Push through it, and the first thing you notice is the temperature. The corridor beyond has no fire in it, and never has. The second thing is the noise, which arrives all at once, the way sound does when a door opens on a room already full of it. Boots on stone, a bell ringing somewhere below and stopping. Two voices arguing pleasantly about whether the fish has come, and under all of it, the sound of the house itself, which from this side is not silent at all, but knocks and hisses and rattles as water moves through pipes and coal shifts in grates and doors close 2 floors down. The stairs here are narrow and turn tightly and are lit by a single window at each half landing. They go down 4 flights, through the bedroom floors, past the ground floor, into the basement. And everything the house eats, burns, wears, or washes comes up them, carried by hand. Let me set out who is down here, because the order is precise, and everyone in it knows exactly where they stand. At the top, on the men's side, is the butler. In a very great house, there might be a house steward above him, running accounts and staff and leaving the butler to the dining room and the cellar. But in a house of this size, 20-odd bedrooms, and a rent roll that is not what it was, the butler does both. He hires the men, keeps the plate, keeps the wine book, and is the person the master speaks to about the house. He has his own sitting room, called the pantry, though it is nothing of the kind, and he sleeps within reach of the safe, where the silver goes at night. Level with him, on the women's side, is the housekeeper. She is addressed as mistress whether or not she has ever married, which is one of those small conventions that tells you what the rank is worth. She hires and dismisses the housemaids and the still-room maids and the laundry women, holds the keys to the linen, the china, the store cupboards, the tea, the sugar, the candles, and issues them out against a written record. She has her own room too, with a fire, and it is the second most powerful room in the house. The cook stands slightly outside both these lines, answering to the mistress directly on menus, and to nobody at all on the running of the kitchen. If the cook is a man and French, the household walks around him with some care. Below those 3, the men run down through the valet, who belongs to the master and not to the house. Then the footmen, ranked first and second and third by seniority. Then the hall boy, who is 14 and does whatever nobody else will. The women run down through the lady's maid. Again the mistresses rather than the houses. Then the head housemaid. Then the second and third and fourth housemaids. Then the kitchen maids under the cook. Then the scullery maid at the bottom of everything, whose job is pots and whose day begins before anyone else's. Here is where the numbers are worth slowing down for, because they are more particular than people expect. A head housemaid in a large country house in 1908 might have somewhere around £28 a year. A younger housemaid, 16 or 18 years old, doing the same work with less responsibility, might have £16 or £18. A first footman would take rather more than the head housemaid, perhaps £35, for work that is lighter, cleaner, and vastly more visible. A butler in a house like this one is on £80 and maybe on £100. A housekeeper running as many people and as much property is on £50. A French chef, if the family employs one, can command £150 a year, and in some houses considerably more, which is to say he is paid more than 5 housemaids together, and knows it, and so does every one of them. Set against that, remember what is not in the figure. Every one of these people is fed, housed, warmed, and lit at the household's expense. Beer money, or the beer itself, is often included. Uniform is found for the men, and, for the women, an allowance toward print dresses in the morning and black in the afternoon. A housemaid's £18 is therefore £18 of clear money in a world where a farm labourer's family is spending most of a weekly wage on bread and rent. That is why the work is competed for. It is also why the wage stays low, because there is always someone at the door. And the footmen. Look at them for a moment, because they explain something about the whole house. Footmen were hired for height, not chiefly for skill, which could be taught in a season, but for inches. 6 feet was worth money. 6 feet 2 was worth more. Advertisements said so plainly, and a tall man could ask for several pounds a year above a short one doing identical work. Where a household kept 2, they were matched, so that they stood at the sideboard the same height, in the same livery, in silk stockings and powdered hair in the grandest houses, like a pair of matched carriage horses. That is exactly the comparison contemporaries made, and nobody found it strange. What this tells you is that a portion of the household's spending is not on labour at all. It is on appearance. A tall footman does not carry a dish more steadily than a short one. He carries it more decoratively. Somewhere in the accounts, there is a line that is really the cost of looking like the kind of family that can afford to choose its servants by the yard. Now add yourselves to it. 20 guests. Every one of those bedrooms needs a fire, laid and lit and fed through the day, which means coal carried up in scuttles, ash carried down, grates blacked in the morning. Every guest wants hot water twice a day at least, and there is one bathroom on that floor, so the water goes up in brass cans wrapped in towels, 4 or 5 gallons at a time, from a tap in a passage below to a washstand 3 floors above. Every bed is stripped and made. Every fireplace is swept. Every guest's boots come off outside the door at night and go back polished before morning. Every guest rings. A country house in ordinary weeks runs at a kind of idle. The family is 4 or 5 people, and the rooms they use are a fraction of the rooms that exist. A house party does not increase the work by a quarter. It doubles it, and it doubles it on top of a staff that has not been increased at all, because you do not hire a 5th housemaid for 3 days in October. What happens instead is that the existing people work longer. The head housemaid's day, which is already 6 in the morning to 10 at night, extends at the far end. The hall boy sleeps less. The kitchen maids are up before 5 to have the ranges hot. The coal alone is worth naming. A house of this size in the shooting season may burn a ton of coal a week, and considerably more with a party in. It arrives at the station, comes over by cart, goes into a cellar, and from that cellar it is distributed in scuttles by hand, up narrow stairs, to something like 30 separate fireplaces. Nobody in the drawing room has ever calculated it. It simply becomes warmth. And your own maid is down here now, in this. She came with you on the train, and the moment she crossed the bay's door, her position changed completely. She is not a servant of this house. She has no place in its hierarchy, and no work in it beyond you. But she cannot simply be an outsider either, because 30 people must sit down to 2 meals a day in a defined order, and so a rule exists to place her. She is ranked by you. That is the whole of it. A visiting lady's maid takes her precedence from the rank of the woman she serves. She will be called by your surname rather than her own, which is a convention so ordinary that she will answer to it without a flicker. At table she will sit where you would sit, in the servants' hall pecking order, and if you were a countess, she would sit near the head of it, and if you are the wife of a man with land and a thinning income, she will sit exactly where that puts her, and everyone in that room will have worked it out before the soup. Custom in many houses sends the upper servants out of the hall after the first course, and into the housekeeper's room for the rest of dinner. Below stairs, they call it the pug's parlour, with some affection and some edge. Your maid may go through those doors or may not, depending on the house and on you. So while you stand at your window taking the measure of the weekend, she is downstairs having hers taken, and the assessment being made of her is the same assessment being made of you, arriving by a different staircase and reaching the same conclusion. 20 minutes. The dressing bell goes at 7:15, and when it does, 30 people move at once. The bell is a real bell, hung in the passage by the servants' stair, and rung by the hall boy who has been told the hour to the minute since he was 12. It carries through the house without hurry, and the effect it produces is instantaneous. Doors open on both floors. Cans of hot water go up the back stairs in pairs. Brass handles wrapped in flannel, because the metal is too hot to hold bare. Somewhere below, a footman lights the last of the candles in the drawing room, and stands back to check the line of them. Your maid comes in behind the water, with your evening gown over her arm, held high and away from her skirts, and she does not put it down on the bed. She hangs it on the wardrobe door and turns to the washstand. You have half an hour. That sounds generous. It is not. Here is the part most people misunderstand about a woman of your class in this year. The picture is of someone being dressed the way a doll is dressed, standing idle while another woman does everything. What actually happens is closer to 2 people assembling a piece of engineering to a deadline, and both of them know the sequence by heart, and neither of them speaks much during it, because speaking slows it down. You wash first at the stand in water that has been carried up 3 floors by hand from a copper in the scullery. There is no bathroom on this corridor. There is a bath somewhere in the house, one of them, possibly 2, and the rule is that a guest does not go looking for it before dinner, because the water supply cannot take 30 people bathing in the same hour, and the housemaids would never recover. Then the building begins, and it begins from the skin outward. First the combinations, linen or fine cotton, 1 garment covering trunk and thigh, because 2 garments make a ridge under what comes next, and a ridge is visible. Then the stockings, silk if you can afford silk, and lisle if you cannot, gartered above the knee. Then the corset, And this is the piece that defines the whole decade. The fashionable corset of 1908 is not the tight-waisted hourglass your grandmother wore. It is a straight-fronted thing, sometimes called the health corset by the people who sell it, on the theory that pressing the abdomen flat and downward rather than squeezing the waist inward is kinder to the body. Whether it is kinder is arguable. What it certainly does is throw the hips back and the bust forward, so that the body from the side describes a long, shallow curve. And this is why the period silhouette has that particular forward-leaning look in every photograph you have ever seen of it. It is boned with steel and whalebone, laced at the back, and it cannot be got into alone. Your maid stands behind you and takes the laces, and you put a hand on the bedpost, and she pulls in short, even movements from the waist outward while you breathe out. There is a moment near the end where you say nothing, and she stops pulling. And neither of you has to discuss where that moment is, because she found it on the second night she ever dressed you, and she has never once got it wrong since. Over the corset, a corset cover. Over that, a petticoat, sometimes two, the outer one of taffeta, because taffeta makes a sound when you walk, and the sound is part of the effect. Then a bust improver, if the gown wants one, which most gowns of this cut do, because the fashionable front is full and soft, and very few women are shaped like the fashion plate without help. Then the gown, which goes on over the head, only if it is the sort that can, and many are not. Many open down the back with 24 small covered hooks, and those hooks are the real reason a woman of your class cannot dress herself, and the real reason your maid travelled with you, and the real reason her wages are what they are. A woman without a maid wears clothes that fasten in front. A woman with one wears clothes that announce, in their construction, that someone else's hands are available to her for half an hour twice a day. Your evening gown is a deep grey-blue silk with a low round neck and short sleeves that sit off the shoulder, and it is cut close through the body and falls straight to the floor with a small train. It is 2 years old. It has been remade once, at the sleeves and the trimming, by a woman in London who does this work well and does not talk about it. The whole assembly, when you are standing in it, weighs something in the region of 8 or 9 pounds. You will carry that weight for the next 5 hours, and you will sit down in it, and you will walk in it over a stone hall floor and up a staircase at the end of the night, and you will not think about it once, because you have been wearing some version of it since you were 17, and the body forgets what it has always carried. Your hair goes up. It is done over pads to give the width the year wants, wide at the sides and full above the forehead, and it takes 11 minutes and a great many pins and a small pot of something to hold the front. Then the last decisions, and the last decisions are the difficult ones. The jewellery is not decoration. It is a statement of position made in public, in front of people who can price it. You have 3 things worth wearing: a string of pearls, good but not remarkable, which came from your husband's mother; a pair of diamond earrings, small, bought in a better year; and a diamond and sapphire brooch that is genuinely fine, and that everyone at this table will recognize as the best thing you own, because they saw it at Ascot and at 2 dinners in Grosvenor Square, and they have long memories for other women's stones. The arithmetic goes like this. Wear all three, and you are trying. Wear the pearls alone, and you are underdressed for a Saturday to Monday at a house of this size, which reads as either indifference or poverty, and neither is useful. Wear the pearls and the earrings, and leave the brooch in its case, and you have said the correct thing, which is that you are perfectly comfortable and have nothing to prove tonight, and may or may not have something better upstairs. You leave the brooch in its case. You will wear it tomorrow, when the party is complete and the neighboring family have come over for Sunday, and it will do more work then. The gloves are long, above the elbow, white kid, and they go on last because kid is a nuisance and marks. The fan is black lace on tortoiseshell sticks, and it is not for the temperature of the room. It is for the 2 seconds of occupation it gives your hands when you are standing alone and would otherwise be standing alone visibly. Your maid moves round you once, slowly, looking at the hem and the back hooks and the set of the shoulders. She adjusts one thing at the left shoulder that you cannot see and would not have noticed. Then she stands away and says the room is ready when you are, which is what she says every night, and it is the closest thing to encouragement that the arrangement between you allows either of you to offer. You look in the glass for 4 seconds, which is all it deserves. The shoulders are bare and even. The line is right. You go down. The staircase is broad and shallow, and it was built by a man who understood that people would be watched coming down it. You do not hurry. Hurrying on a staircase in a trained skirt is how a woman ends a weekend early. The drawing room doors are open, and the light coming out of them is warmer than the hall, and the sound is the particular sound of 20-odd people who have all known each other for years, talking at a level that has been calibrated to a room this size. Now the assessment. It takes about 4 seconds, and it is entirely silent, and nobody has ever written the rules down. In those 4 seconds, every woman in that room has read your gown, dated it, priced it, decided whether it has been remade, noted the pearls, noted the absence of anything larger, and filed the whole thing. Every man has registered rather less than that, but has registered enough. And you have done exactly the same to the 11 women already standing there, in the same 4 seconds, without moving your eyes in any way that could be described later. You cross to your hostess, who has been standing near the fire for 20 minutes, doing this to every arrival, and showing no sign of it whatever. She says something pleasant about the journey. You say something pleasant about the room. Neither remark contains information. Both are load-bearing. And then, at 10 minutes to 8, the butler appears in the doorway, waits for a gap, and says that dinner is served. What happens next looks like nothing, and is, in fact, the most precisely governed 30 seconds of the entire evening. The company does not simply walk through. They pair off and process in order. And the order is not a matter of taste or friendship. It is precedence. And precedence is a real system with a real published table. And it runs on rank. And rank runs on titles and on the offices men hold, and on the dates their families acquired what they have. The host offers his arm to the highest-ranking woman present. The highest-ranking man offers his to your hostess, then the rest, in descending order, each gentleman with a lady, moving out of the drawing room in a line that will be repeated tomorrow night and the night after, with almost no variation. Your hostess has spent part of yesterday afternoon working this out on paper, and she has had to solve at least one problem in it that nobody at the table will ever hear about. A man you have met twice comes to you and offers his arm, and you take it. And you know from that alone precisely where you stand in this house this weekend, because he is neither the highest nor the lowest, and you go through the door in the middle of the line, which is, on the whole, where you expected to be. The dining room is long and lit low, and the first thing you notice is the temperature. It is warmer than the drawing room by several degrees, because the fire has been burning here since 4 o'clock, and because 22 people and a great many candles produce heat of their own. The table runs most of the length of the room. Silver down the middle, and between the silver, low arrangements of ferns and late roses that have come out of a glass house a quarter mile away and will be dead by Tuesday. At each place, propped against a glass, there is a small card with the menu written on it in a clerk's copperplate hand, and the menu is in French. Not because anyone at this table is French, and not because the food is especially French, but because that is what a menu is. You read yours while you settle your skirts. There are 8 courses on it. Soup, 2 kinds, and you may choose. Fish. Then a made dish of some complexity, the sort of thing that arrives in a sauce and has been assembled rather than merely cooked. Then the meat, a saddle of mutton or a haunch of venison, carved at a side table by a man whose entire job for the next 10 minutes is to carve it correctly. Then the birds, which came off this estate. Then a sweet, then a savoury, small and salty, on a bit of toast. Then dessert, which in this house means fruit and nuts and the good glasses. You will be at this table for something close to 2 hours. That pace is deliberate, and it is worth slowing down for, because 2 hours is not how long it takes to eat 8 courses. It is how long the evening has been designed to last. The food is the clock. Every course is a unit of time in which a fixed amount of conversation must be produced, and the servant's job is to keep the units arriving at a rhythm that never leaves the room with nothing to do. At the far end of a stone passage, behind 2 doors, and down a short flight of steps, that rhythm is being manufactured. The kitchen is a long way from you on purpose. It was built a long way off, so that the smell of cooking would never reach the dining room, which means that every dish you eat tonight travels perhaps 40 yards in a covered container, and arrives at a temperature nobody in this room would accept in a restaurant. That is understood. It is one of the small absurdities that the whole system has agreed not to mention. The person running that kitchen tonight is a French chef, a man, and he is the second highest paid person on this estate after the land agent. A chef of any real reputation in 1908 might be paid somewhere in the region of £150 a year, and a celebrated one considerably more, with his own kitchen staff under him, and a degree of independence that no other servant in the house enjoys. He does not take instruction from the housekeeper. He deals with your hostess directly, in a conversation that both of them find slightly uncomfortable, and he has been known to threaten to leave over the question of who has the ordering of the fish. The alternative, in a house of slightly smaller ambition, is a plain cook. A woman, paid perhaps £40 a year, sometimes less, capable of feeding a family and a household of servants to a very high standard of ordinary English cooking, and quite incapable of producing 8 courses in French for 22 people without a fortnight's warning and a nervous collapse. The difference between those two figures, £100 and more, is precisely the difference between a house that gives weekend parties and a house that does not. So when you read that menu card, you are reading a wage bill. The soup goes round, and with it, the evening's real work begins, and it is not eating. You speak to the man on your right. This is not a preference. It is the rule of turning, and it governs conversation at every formal table in the country. Through the first courses, the whole table is inclined one way, each woman speaking to the man on her right, each man to the woman on his left, so that the entire company is angled in a single direction like grass in wind. Then, at some point around the middle of the meal, your hostess turns her head to the guest on her other side, and within a few seconds, all down the table, everyone turns with her. The whole room pivots. And you begin again with the man on your left, whom until that moment you have not addressed at all, and will now talk to for the rest of dinner. If you turn early, you leave a woman stranded with nobody to speak to. If you turn late, you find yourself talking to a shoulder. Nobody will correct you. Everyone will notice. The man on your right is somebody's brother and has recently come back from Egypt. He tells you about the heat and about a hotel in Cairo, and you ask him the sort of question that lets him keep going, and you are perhaps a third engaged. The other 2/3 of you are doing something more difficult. Here is what is actually required of you at this table. You must be interesting. You must be pleasant. You must produce across 2 hours a steady supply of remarks that are neither dull nor startling, on subjects that are neither trivial nor serious. You may talk about travel, about the season, about people you both know, about books provided they are the right ones, about the shooting, about the weather in an inventive way, about the king if you are careful. You may not talk about money, or about religion, or about politics in a manner that suggests you hold a position, rather than merely reflect one. You may not talk at length about your own health, or your children in detail, or anyone's private difficulties, and when the whole thing is over, you must not have been memorable. That is the part that would surprise the people who imagine this evening as glamour. A woman who is repeated afterwards, who becomes a story told in another house next month, has failed at something, unless she is famous enough to be permitted it. What you are aiming for is that your hostess should think, when she reviews the evening in her head at 11:30, that the table went well. Not that you were brilliant, that it went well. Your success is invisible by design, and it takes years to learn, and it is genuinely difficult, and no one on earth will describe it as work. Around this, the footmen move. There are 4 of them tonight, and they serve from your left, and each dish is offered to you on a flat silver dish with a spoon and fork laid across it, so that you may serve yourself. This is the way it is done in a house of this kind, and it means that every guest, 22 times over, performs a small feat of one-handed dexterity in a tight sleeve, while continuing to talk about Cairo. The men doing the serving have been trained to be absent. They do not speak. They are not spoken to. except in the smallest necessary syllables. They stand back against the wall between courses in a line, watching the table constantly, because a good footman refills a glass the moment before you would have wanted it, and never at the moment you notice. Plates are changed between every course, which for 8 courses and 22 people is several hundred separate movements, each of them silent. You know one of these men by sight. He carried your dressing case up 2 flights this afternoon. Tonight he does not look at you, and you do not look at him. And both of you are performing that with equal skill, and if you thought about it directly for more than a moment, you would find it strange. The wine keeps pace with the food. A different glass for the fish, another for the meat, another with the sweet, and the glasses accumulate at your place like a small transparent city. You drink very little of it. Most of the women drink very little of it. It is not forbidden. It is simply that a woman who is noticed drinking is a woman who has been noticed. Somewhere in the middle of the venison, your hostess turns her head to the left. The room turns with her. A soft, general rearrangement, a change in the sound of the voices. The man on your right releases you mid-sentence without either of you minding. You turn, and you begin again from nothing with a man you have never met, and you have perhaps 50 minutes with him. And you start with the house, because the house is always safe. The savory comes and goes. Then the dessert, and the fruit that has been grown under glass and cost more per pound than the mutton, and finches of conversation getting quieter as people tire. And then your hostess catches the eye of the woman at the far end of the table and rises. Every woman in the room rises with her. It is not announced. The men stand while you go, and the door is opened, and the whole female half of the party walks out together and back along the passage to the drawing room, and the door closes behind you, and the men sit down again to their port. You will hear a great deal about what happens in that half hour, most of it from men who find it amusing to describe. They pass the decanter to the left. They smoke. They talk about the shooting, and about a horse, and about the government, and about the county. And they talk in a register they do not use in front of you, which is to say more directly and with fewer decorations. What is less often described is what happens on your side of the door. Because the women who have just walked out of that room are not resting. Coffee comes. The room reassembles itself into 3 or 4 conversations, and in those conversations, over the next half hour, information moves. Who is ill? Who is selling land? Whose daughter is being taken to London in the spring? And why? Which engagement is nearly settled, and which has quietly stopped being discussed? Nothing is stated outright. Everything is understood. The men have the port and the politics. The women have the intelligence and the marriages and the map of who everybody is going to become. You take your coffee and sit where your hostess indicates, which is beside a woman you have not yet spoken to. And that is not an accident either. The woman beside you is perhaps 50, with a long face and very good pearls, and she is the wife of a man who sits on 3 boards and owns coal under land he has never walked across. Your hostess has put you here because you have something the 2 of you might use. You do not yet know what it is. You will know within 10 minutes, because that is roughly how long it takes, in this room, to establish what a stranger is for. So you begin where everyone begins, the journey down, the weather, the house, praised in a particular way that says you have seen better houses without saying it. She answers in kind. Then she mentions, quite lightly, that her younger son has taken a commission and is stationed not 40 miles from the county where your husband's people come from. And there it is. The connection is found. The conversation can now proceed on solid ground. Coffee is brought in small cups on a tray by a footman who does not look at anyone. There is no milk offered and none expected. The room has rearranged itself while you are doing this, and it is worth noticing how. 11 women in a drawing room the size of a parish hall do not spread evenly. They cluster. There is a group by the fire, which is the senior group, the married women of the largest houses, and there is a group near the piano, younger, 3 of them, one unmarried, and being watched without appearing to be watched. There is a pair on the sofa under the window who have known each other since girlhood, and who will talk to nobody else all evening, and who everyone accepts will talk to nobody else all evening. Your hostess moves. That is her work now. She has spent the afternoon deciding the dinner table, and she will spend this half hour undoing and redoing the room. 3 minutes here, 4 minutes there, lifting one woman out of a conversation that has gone flat, and setting her down in another where she will be useful. She does it with a hand on a forearm and a sentence about wanting somebody to see the new fire screen. Nobody names it as management. It is management of a fairly high order, and she has been doing it since she came down at 4:30 to check the flowers. Somebody asks whether you play. This is not a casual question, and you do not treat it as one. What is being asked is whether you will fill the next 20 minutes, and whether you will fill it well enough that nobody has to talk over you out of kindness. You say that you play a little, which is what everyone says, and you go to the piano, which is a Broadwood grand and better maintained than the one at home, and you play a Chopin nocturne that you have played several hundred times, because it is difficult enough to be respectable and familiar enough that your hands do not need supervision. There is a rule underneath this, and it is worth stating plainly. You are expected to perform competently. You are not expected to perform well. A woman of your class who plays like a professional has made an error because it suggests she practiced like one, and practicing like one suggests she once needed to. The ideal is a light, pleasant, accurate performance from a woman who could clearly do more if she cared to, and who does not care to, because caring would be vulgar. So you play the nocturne cleanly, and you do not take the middle section as slowly as you would like to, and you stop before anyone has to decide how long to keep listening. And there is a soft, general murmur of thanks, and the room's conversation closes over the sound like water. Here is what that 20 minutes actually cost. You began the piano at 6. Not 6 in the evening. 6 years old. 2 lessons a week from a woman who came out from the county town on the carriage, and after that a governess who oversaw the practicing. 1 hour every morning before anything else, sitting in the room with a book on her knee while you went through the scales. You did that until you were 18. Then a term of Italian singing lessons in London, and drawing and dancing, and enough French to be understood in a shop, and enough German to say you had it. Household accounts survive from families very much like yours, and the numbers are steady enough to state. A resident governess in a comfortable country house in the 1890s cost somewhere between £40 and £80 a year, with her board on top of that, and the visiting masters for music and drawing and dancing added perhaps another £30 or £40 annually. Across the 12 years between 6 and 18, the education of one daughter to the standard now being demonstrated at this piano ran to something well over £1,000, for which you cannot earn a shilling, hold an office, sit an examination that leads anywhere, or manage your own property if your marriage settlement was drawn in the ordinary way. The accomplishments were never meant to make you capable of anything. They were meant to make you visible as a woman whose family could afford to spend 12 years making her ornamental, and to give you something to do with your hands in a drawing room for the 60 years afterward. That is the whole of it, stated flatly. And the flat statement is not quite fair either, because the music is genuinely yours, and the nocturne under your fingers is a real pleasure that nobody arranged for and nobody can take back. And both of those things are true at once, and neither cancels the other. The card tables come out at 10:15. 2 of them, brought in by a footman, and unfolded and set with new packs, because bridge has arrived in England in the last several years, and has gone through houses like this one the way a fashion in hats goes through them, which is to say, totally, and within about 3 seasons. Your hostess is not a great player, but her husband is, and there will be 4 at one table and 4 at the other, and the composition of those 8s is another small decision she makes, while appearing to make none. You are put at the second table with the woman in the pearls, an elderly baronet who has come in from the dining room ahead of the others, and a man of about 40 who plays too fast. The stakes are named before the first deal, which is the polite way, so that nobody has to ask. 6 a 100. That is not nothing, and it is not much. Over a full evening, 4 or 5 rubbers, a bad player at 6 a 100 might lose 15 or 20 shillings, which is a week's wages for the housemaid, who will clean this grate tomorrow morning at 5:30. And it is also roughly what your husband would spend on a hat box without thinking about it. Both facts sit in the room together, and nobody in the room says either one aloud. There are houses where the stakes go to half a crown, 100 and higher, and where a weekend's cards can cost a guest more than the wardrobe she brought, and part of the intelligence you gathered over coffee is knowing which houses those are and declining invitations accordingly. This is not one of them. Your host likes bridge and does not need it. There is an etiquette to losing here, and it is not what people outside the room assume. You are not expected to lose deliberately to your host. That would be an insult, and he would see it in 3 tricks. You are expected to lose without commentary. You do not sigh. You do not review the hand aloud. You do not explain what you would have done if your partner had led the other suit. You gather the cards, you say something short and pleasant, and you deal. The man of 40 who plays too fast does not know this rule, and he explains 2 hands in a row, and you watch the elderly baronet's face acquire a very slight stillness that is the closest thing to violence this room will produce all evening. At about 11, the door opens, and the men come through from the dining room. You feel the room change, and you would feel it with your eyes shut. The volume goes up by a measurable degree. The clusters break and reform around the men who have come in, and the two women on the sofa under the window finally look up. Cigar smoke arrives with them in their coats and settles into the curtains where it will still be tomorrow. Somebody rings for whiskey and soda, and the talk in the room broadens because the men bring the conversation they were having through with them, and it does not immediately fold itself down to drawing room size. So for perhaps a quarter of an hour, while the second rubber runs, you hear the tale of it. The Lords, and what will happen to the Lords. Old age pensions, which came in this year, 5 shillings a week at 70, and the whole county arguing about who will pay for it. Germany, and the dockyards. A man near the fire says something about the land taxes coming, and another man says they will never get them through, and the first man says that he has heard otherwise, from someone who would know. You are permitted to hear all of this. You are permitted to have opinions about it, and to express them in a moderate register to one man at a time, in a conversation nobody else is quite listening to. You are not permitted to address the room. Nobody has ever told you this. You have simply never seen a woman do it. The last rubber ends a little after midnight. You have won 4 and 6pence, and you take it without comment. The candlesticks are on the hall table in 2 ranks, brass, each with a fresh candle, though there is electric light in the corridors of the main floor, and has been for 6 years. The candles are for the bedroom passages, which have gas, which is turned down and then off. You take yours. The stairs are cold after the drawing room. Your maid is waiting on the landing, and has been waiting some time, and she takes the pins out one by one while you sit and say almost nothing, and the corset comes off, and you can breathe from the bottom of your lungs for the first time since 7 o'clock. The fire has been banked. The hot water can under its towel has gone lukewarm. Below you and around you, floor by floor, the house is going quiet in stages. The drawing room first, then the hall, then the passages, and last of all, much later than you, the kitchen. The kitchen goes quiet last, because it is the room that must be ready first, and the gap between those two facts is only about 5 hours. At 5:30 on Saturday morning, in the dark, 3 housemaids come down the back stairs in print dresses, which is the morning uniform, plain cotton, washable, worn until midday, when it is exchanged for black. They carry housemaid's boxes. A housemaid's box is a wooden tray with a handle down the middle, and compartments for black lead, emery paper, a brush for the flues, a brush for the bars, a cloth for the fender, and a folded sheet of coarse cloth to kneel on. It weighs perhaps 12 pounds when it is loaded, and it is carried up and down between 3 and 4 floors an unrecorded number of times before breakfast. The sequence is fixed, and it is the same in every large house in the county. First, the hearth is swept, the ash lifted into a covered pail so that it does not rise into the room. Then the grate is black-leaded, which means a paste is worked into the iron with one brush and polished off with a second and burnished with a third, until the metal has a soft, dark shine. The steel fire irons and the fender front are rubbed with emery to take off the rust that a night of damp air has put on them. Then the hearthstone is washed. Then the fire is laid, paper kindling coal arranged so that it will take with one match. Then the room is dusted, the carpet swept with damp tea leaves scattered to hold the dust down. The furniture moved and moved back. Then the shutters are opened and the curtains drawn in that order, so that the light comes into a room that is already finished. A housemaid does this to the morning room, the library, the hall, the smoking room, the billiard room, and the dining room before the family sees any of them. It takes about half an hour a room if nothing goes wrong. She has done 7 rooms by 8:30, and she has not yet begun the bedrooms, and the bedrooms are the larger part of her day. This is worth putting a number to. The house has 41 bedrooms, and something over 20 are in use this weekend. Each occupied bedroom has a fire that must be cleaned and laid and lit, and each fire is fed through the day by a housemaid carrying coal in a scuttle up a back staircase, because there is no other way for the coal to arrive. A country house of this size burns somewhere between 300 and 400 tons of coal in a year, and in a house party week, the daily figure roughly doubles. Every ton of it is moved by hand at least twice after it leaves the cart. Here is something easy to misunderstand about the period. This is 1908. The electric light in the main corridors was put in 6 years ago, run off a generator in an outbuilding behind the stables, which a man attends to as a portion of his job. There is a telephone in the business room. There are vacuum cleaners in existence, large machines, some of them mounted on carts that draw up outside a house and run hoses in through the windows, hired by the day. There are gas water heaters. There are ranges that will run on oil. The house has almost none of it. Not because the family is poor in any sense that would be recognized outside the class, and not because they are hostile to machinery. It is arithmetic. A housemaid costs between £18 and £24 a year in wages. A machine costs money once, and then costs money again when it breaks, and requires a man who understands it. Labour at £20 a year is the cheapest input available to a household. Cheaper than coal, cheaper than horses, cheaper by a long way than glass and iron and mechanism. So the house buys labour. It buys a great deal of labour, and it arranges that labour into a system so refined that it can produce for the guest the impression that nothing is being done at all. The consequence is that the great house is one of the least mechanized places in England in 1908. A clerk's wife in a suburb of Birmingham, in a house of 6 rooms with 1 girl coming in daily, is more likely to own a gas cooker and a carpet sweeper than the household you are asleep in. The machines arrive in the small houses first, because in the small houses there is nobody else to do it. You do not see any of the morning. What you see begins at 8, when there is a knock and your maid comes in with a tray, and behind her a housemaid with the hot water can, and the fire in your grate is already burning because it was lit at 7 while you slept, and you did not wake. The tray has a small pot of tea, thin bread and butter, and nothing else. That is the standing convention, and it is not about appetite. Breakfast in bed for the women is a rule of the house party, more or less absolute, and it exists for 2 reasons. The first is that a woman of your class cannot come downstairs before she is fully dressed for the day, and being fully dressed takes over an hour with assistance. The second is that the morning belongs to the men, and if the women were downstairs, the men would have to be conversational at 8 in the morning, which nobody wants. So you sit up against the pillows with the tray across your knees. And this is, honestly, one of the 2 hours of the weekend you would choose to keep. The letters have come with the tray. There are 5. 2 are bills forwarded from home, which you set aside without opening, because there is nothing to be done about them from here. 1 is from your sister-in-law. 1 is an invitation for February, which you will have to answer in a way that neither accepts nor refuses, because you do not yet know whether you can afford February. 1 is from your husband, who is not here, who has been in Scotland since Tuesday on business that he has described to you as business. Post comes twice a day into the house, morning and afternoon, and goes out 3 times. And this is not a rural inconvenience, but a genuinely fast national system. A letter posted in London before 6 in the evening arrives here by the first delivery. A letter you write this morning and put in the hall basket by 10 will be read in a Mayfair breakfast room tomorrow. There is no telephone worth using between houses. Everything runs on paper, and the volume of it is not small. A woman visiting for a weekend is expected to write, at minimum, to whoever is looking after her children, to whoever is minding her house, to at least one friend who was not invited and must be given an account of who was, and within 2 days of leaving, a letter of thanks to her hostess that is neither perfunctory nor gushing, and that mentions at least one specific pleasure of the visit by name. That is 4 or 5 letters over 3 days, on top of the invitations answered. 1,500 words, perhaps 2,000, written by hand, on borrowed paper, in the half hours between other obligations. Nobody has ever called this work. You have never once heard it counted as work. It is simply what a woman produces, the way a hedge produces leaves. Downstairs at the same hour, the men are at the sideboard. This is the other convention, and it is the mirror of yours. Breakfast for the men is laid out on a long sideboard in the dining room, under domed covers over spirit lamps that keep the dishes hot, and it stays there from 8:30 until 10:30. Kidneys, bacon, eggs done 3 ways, kedgeree, cold ham and cold game left from the day before, a cold tongue, porridge on the hot plate at one end, toast in racks, marmalade in a cut glass jar with a silver spoon that has been polished this week. The men come down when they choose, help themselves, and sit where they like. Nobody is served. No footman stands behind a chair. A man may read the newspaper at the table, which he could not do at dinner, and may leave the table when he is finished, which he could not do at dinner either. Do not mistake this informality for the absence of rules. It is a rule, and a strict one, and it has been arranged. The dishes are hot because a kitchen has been running since 6. The sideboard holds 11 dishes because there are 14 men in the house, and the number has been calculated. The relaxation is a manufactured product, and it is manufactured by roughly 9 people you will not see this morning. And the entire point of it is that the men eating the kidneys should experience the morning as something that has simply arrived, like weather. By 9, your maid is back, and the day's real decision is in front of you, laid across the bed in 3 parts. It is a shooting day. The guns go out at 10. The women are expected to walk out at midday and join them for luncheon. And there has been rain in the night, and there will be wet grass to the knee across 2 fields. So it is the tweed. A walking costume in a heather mixture, the skirt cut clear of the ground by 4 inches, which is as short as a skirt is permitted to be, and which was faintly shocking 10 years ago. Wool stockings, boots that button with a nailed sole, a shirt with a stiff collar, and a tie, because that is the correct upper half for the country in the morning. A hat that will not blow off. The corset stays, though it is a shorter one, cut for movement, which means only that it is a form of restriction that permits you to walk. And having chosen it, you have chosen the rest of the day, because you will now change out of it at 4 for tea, and out of that at 7 for dinner. And every one of those changes takes your maid 25 minutes, and takes you out of the room and out of the conversation, while the conversation continues without you. You go down at 9:30. The hall smells of wood smoke and wet dog. Somebody has already gone out and come back. The gravel court on the east side of the house is where the day begins for the men, and by 10 there are perhaps 20 people standing in it, of whom 8 are guests. The 8 have guns. The other 12 are the reason the 8 will be able to use them. There is the head keeper, a man of about 50, in a suit of estate tweed, cut from the same bolt as the 2 underkeepers standing behind him, so that the 3 of them read at a glance as a set. There are loaders, 1 to each gun, some of them keepers, and some of them borrowed from the stables for the day. There are boys with cartridge bags. There are dogs, sitting or refusing to sit. There is a cart with the luncheon already loaded and covered against the weather. Nobody hurries. That is the first thing you notice from the window on the half landing, watching it assemble. The headkeeper says something to your host, quietly, and your host nods and says something back, and then they stand for a moment looking at the sky in the manner of 2 men who have had this same conversation on this same gravel, in this same weather, for 20 years. The wind is southwest and light. The birds will fly the way the keeper has spent 11 months arranging for them to fly. Then the whole apparatus moves off toward the beach, hanging on the far side of the park, and the court is empty, and you have 2 hours. Here is something worth slowing down for, because the picture most people carry of this scene is a picture of leisure, and the scene is not leisure. It is the visible top layer of an agricultural business, and the business is not doing well. Consider what a day of driven birds actually costs to produce. The headkeeper on an estate of this size is paid somewhere in the region of £80 to £100 a year, with a cottage, coal, and a suit of clothes, which puts him well above a farm labourer, and roughly level with a first footman in cash terms, but far above him in security and standing. Under him are 2 or 3 men at perhaps £1 a week each, plus cottages. Beneath them, seasonally, are boys and beaters hired by the day at 2 or 3 shillings, and on a shooting day there may be 20 of them walking through the coverts. Then there is the stock itself. The birds are not wild in any meaningful sense. They have been reared from eggs in coops in a clearing behind the keeper's cottage, fed on meal and grain through the summer, at a cost the estate accounts record with some precision, and then released into woodland that has been planted, thinned, and maintained as cover with no other purpose. Add the food, the wire, the cartridges, the maintenance of rides and gates, the wages, the cottages, and the honest arithmetic of the period suggests that a bird presented over the guns costs the estate somewhere between 5 and 10 shillings to produce. It is sold afterward to a game dealer for perhaps 1 shilling and 6pence, or given away in hampers to relatives and tenants and the doctor. So the loss is deliberate and enormous, and everyone in the gravel court knows it. The day is not an income. It is an expenditure with a social return. And the return is the 8 men standing in the court, 3 of whom sit in Parliament, 1 of whom controls a railway board, and 2 of whose daughters are being looked at this weekend by mothers with sons. And underneath that expenditure sits the fact that gives this whole weekend its faint, well-mannered tension. Since the middle of the 1870s, English land has been getting poorer. Grain came in from America by the shipload, cheap, and it kept coming, and the price of wheat fell by something close to half and stayed down. Rents followed. On heavy arable land in the eastern counties, a landlord who took 30 shillings an acre in 1875 might be taking 18 or 20 by the 90s, and taking it late, and taking it from a tenant who wants the roofs mended before he will sign again. Farms went untenanted. Some were taken back in hand and worked by the estate at a loss, because an empty farm is worse than a losing one. The families in this house did not become poor. That is not what happened, and it would be a sentimental misreading to say so. What happened is that the ground shifted underneath a system built on the assumption that land produced income by itself forever without anyone thinking about it. And so a house like this one is now supported by other things. By a marriage that brought railway money or brewery money or American money, by coal underneath a Yorkshire property, by ground rents in a London street, by directorships taken up quietly by men whose grandfathers would have considered a directorship faintly disgusting. Your host's father would have described his income as coming from his estate. Your host, if you could make him say it aloud, which you cannot, would have to describe his estate as being paid for by his income. Hold that in your mind while you put on your hat at 11:30, because it explains a great deal about the weekend that would otherwise look merely pleasant. 4 of you walk out together, and one of the older women goes in the pony cart. The path runs along the edge of the park wall, and then out through a gate into a lane. And the lane is deep in wet leaves, and within 10 minutes the hem of the tweed is soaked and heavy, and you are extremely glad of the 4 inches. You can hear the shooting long before you see anybody. It comes in bursts, then long silences, then bursts again, and between them the tapping and calling of the beaters working a wood. Luncheon is laid in a barn on the home farm, which has been swept that morning and hung with a length of sailcloth to cut the draught from the door. Trestles, a white cloth, and on it a spread that has travelled 2 miles in a cart and arrived warm because it was packed in hay boxes. A hot soup in a lidded urn, a steak pie, cold pheasant, a ham, potatoes in a covered dish, cheese, apple tarts, a case of beer for the beaters outside, and claret and sherry on the table. 2 footmen have come out with it and stand behind, in plainer clothes than they would wear in the dining room. And the informality of the barn is precisely as constructed as the formality of the house. It costs the same number of hands. The men come in with their faces red, and their voices louder than they were at breakfast. The keeper does not come in. He eats outside with his men, and this is not a slight, and would be experienced as an intrusion if it were otherwise. You sit on a bench beside a woman you have not spoken to properly since Friday, and for an hour the talk is about nothing, in the good sense, and somebody's dog eats a whole apple tart off the end of the table and is universally forgiven. Afterward, while the guns are moving out to the last drive of the day, you find yourself at the door of the keeper's cottage, because the pony cart is being brought round from there, and you have 20 minutes to wait. The keeper's wife comes out and asks if you would care to sit down out of the wind, and you say you would, and she brings a chair into the doorway and stands. She will not sit. You do not ask her to twice, because asking twice would be a way of insisting that she take a position she has already decided is not hers, which would be a discourtesy, dressed as a kindness. So you talk in the doorway, and it takes about 4 minutes to establish that she knows a great deal more about this estate than you will learn all weekend. She raised the better part of 2,000 young birds this summer, in coops in the clearing you passed, and she is the one who fed them and watched for the weather, and got up in the night when a fox worked the wire, because that is what a keeper's wife does, and it is not counted anywhere as employment or paid for as such. She has 4 children. The eldest boy is on the beating line today, at 2 shillings. Her husband's cottage is rent-free, and the coal comes down from the house. She tells you the number of birds without pride and without complaint, as a fact about the year, the way you might mention the number of dinners you have given. Then she says that the wire wants replacing before next season, and she does not suppose it will be replaced, and she says it looking at the middle distance. And you understand that you have just been given, with great precision, a piece of information intended for your host, delivered through the only channel available to her. You say that you will mention it. She says, "Thank you, my lady," and goes back inside, and you sit in the doorway with your wet hem steaming, and think about the accuracy of that. The cart comes. On the way back you pass, in the space of a mile, the buildings that keep the house alive, and that no guest is ever shown. The laundry, a long, low block with its own coppers and drying loft, where 4 women are employed full-time, and where the linen of a house party is a week's work in itself. The dairy, tiled and cold, with its slate shelves and its shallow pans. The stables, 12 loose boxes, and a coach house and a harness room, with a coachman, a groom, and 2 boys. The sawpit, the forge, the gas works, disused now, and the engine house that makes the electric light. Each one has a head to it. Each one has its own hours, its own wages, its own small internal order. The house at the top of the drive is not a house. It is the residence attached to a works, and the works employs, one way and another, somewhere close to 100 people. And the entire purpose of its architecture is to arrange things so that when you come back up the drive at 4 o'clock with wet boots, all you see is a long lit window and somebody bringing out tea. The boots come off in a small room by the garden door, and this is the first mercy of the afternoon. There is a maid there, whose entire function for the next hour is boots and wet hems, and she takes yours away without comment, and you go up the back way in stockinged feet, because the front stairs are for people who are dry. Upstairs, Your maid has already run the water and laid out the tea gown. And here at last is the one honest kindness in your whole wardrobe. A tea gown in 1908 is a garment with a strange little history behind it. It began as a compromise, something a woman could wear in her own drawing room in the late afternoon, without being fully dressed and without being indecent. And by now it has hardened into a convention of its own, which is to say, it has rules. But the rules are gentler than the ones you have been obeying since Friday evening. The tea gown is loose. It is not built over a corset in the full sense. There is boning, there is shape, there is a good deal of lace at the throat, and a train that drags a little on the carpet. But the waist is not cinched to the measurement that dinner will require of you at 8. And there is no bone pressing at the base of your ribs, and you can breathe from the bottom of your lungs for the first time since 7:30 this morning. Yours is a soft green silk with a chiffon overlay and a good deal of Irish lace down the front, and it cost 11 guineas, and you have had it 2 years, and it is the only garment you own that you would describe as comfortable. You come down at 10 minutes to 5. Tea is laid in the hall, which is not a hallway in the sense you would use the word at home, but a room 40 feet by 25, with a great fireplace at one end and a staircase rising out of it, and enough sofas scattered about to seat 20 people in loose clusters. The fire is enormous. The lamps are lit. There are 3 low tables carrying the whole apparatus: the urn, the pot, the hot water jug, the muffin dish over its own small flame, bread and butter cut so thin you can see the plate through it, scones, a seed cake, a chocolate cake, sandwiches of cucumber and of potted meat, and a large fruit cake that nobody will touch until Sunday. And the whole thing is presented as though it has simply happened. That is the point of tea, and it is worth being clear about it. Tea in a house like this is the one meal of the day at which the servants are meant to be nearly absent. The footmen bring it in and set it down and go. Your hostess pours. The women hand the cups about. There is no service, no procession, no precedence, no seating plan. People sit where they like, and get up and move and sit somewhere else, and men come in from the gun room in tweed, and are not sent away to change, and the talk crosses the room instead of running in 2 straight lines, the way it does at dinner. It is the most informal hour of the entire weekend, and it has been constructed with as much care as the dinner table. The informality is a manufactured product. Somebody laid those fires at 6:30 this morning. Somebody baked that seed cake. Somebody decided that muffins would be wanted after a wet day, and had them made, and the ease of the room rests on a set of decisions made hours ago by a woman who is now sitting on a sofa looking as though she has spent the day reading. You take a cup and find a place near the fire, and this is where the real business of a country house weekend actually gets done, because this is what a house party is for, not the shooting. The shooting is the reason given. The reason underneath is that a house party assembles for 3 days in a confined space with nothing else to do. A group of families who need to arrange marriages between one another, and it lets them observe each other at close range without anything being said aloud. Think about the position of the mothers in this room. A girl of 19 or 20 in this class has a working life of about 4 seasons in which to marry, and marry well. and every one of those seasons costs her family real money. A London season for one daughter, presenting her at court, taking a house or rooms in town for the months of the season, the dresses, the carriages, the balls given in return for balls attended, comes to something in the neighbourhood of £1,000. Some families spend a great deal more, and it must be done again the following year if it does not succeed, and the returns diminish each time. So the mother, sitting across from you with her teacup, is doing arithmetic. She is establishing which of the young men here has an entailed estate, and which has an allowance, what the acreage is, whether the acreage carries a mortgage, and whether there is a mother-in-law who will expect to keep the dower house. She is doing it while discussing the wet weather, and she will have most of it settled by Monday, and she will never write any of it down. The money involved is stated plainly when the time comes, and it is stated by lawyers. A marriage settlement is a legal document, negotiated between the two families' solicitors, and it sets out what the bride brings and what the groom's family undertakes to provide. A daughter of a comfortable landed family might bring £5,000 settled on her, which at the 4% you can reasonably expect from safe investment yields £200 a year of her own, which is her pin money, which is the only income she will ever control outright. A very great heiress brings far more. A girl from a family in the position yours is now in might bring £2,000 and be grateful that anybody asked. And on the other side, the settlement fixes her jointure, which is what she will live on if she is widowed, and it fixes what the younger sons and daughters of the marriage will receive, and it ties up the estate itself so that it passes intact to the eldest son and cannot be sold by anybody in between. Land goes down the male line. Money is what women are given instead. There is a variation on all this that everybody in the room has an opinion about, and that is the American marriage. Since the 1870s, a steady traffic has run in one direction across the Atlantic. The daughters of very rich American families, whose fathers made their money in railways or mining or steel or dry goods, marrying into British titles. By now, there have been well over 100 such marriages. The exchange is not disguised, and never has been. The girl brings capital, sometimes an enormous amount of it, a settlement of £100,000 or £200,000, sums that dwarf anything an English family can offer. The family she marries into brings a name, a title, a house, and a place in a society that no amount of American money can otherwise buy. Both sides know exactly what is being traded. The rooms you are sitting in houses across this county, have been re-roofed and re-plumbed and re-hung with new silk on American money, and everybody knows which ones. You have opinions about this yourself, and you keep them to yourself, because you are £3,000 a year, and fallen, and your feelings about heiresses are not disinterested. The girl comes and sits by you at about 5:30. She is 19, in her first year out, and she is being watched by every mother in the room, and she knows it and is carrying it well. She asks you about the walk to the luncheon, and whether the mud was very bad, and you talk about the mud, and then she says, in a slightly different voice, that she supposes you have known this house a long time, and what she is asking, without any of the words being available to her, is whether the eldest son here is what he appears to be, and whether the estate is what it appears to be, and whether her mother's arithmetic is sound. You cannot answer that. There is no form of words in which you can tell a girl of 19 that the family has sold 900 acres in the last decade, and that the new roof came from the sale, or that his allowance is smaller than his manner suggests. You may not say a word against your host in his own house. You may not discuss another family's money with a stranger. And you may not lie to her, because she is 19, and this is the whole of her future. So you do what women in your position have always done, which is to give her something true, and let her make of it what she can. You say that the family have been very good landlords, and that it is a difficult time to be a landlord anywhere, and that her mother will no doubt have asked all the sensible questions. She looks at you for a moment. She is not stupid. Then she says thank you, and asks whether you take sugar, and the conversation goes back to the mud. At 6, the room begins to thin. There is an hour and a half before the dressing bell, and people scatter to write letters or sleep or play billiards, and you go through into the library, which is empty and cold at the far end and warm near the fire. 4,000 volumes, perhaps. Calf bindings in long runs, sermons and county histories, and the parliamentary debates of the 1790s, bought by somebody's grandfather by the yard, and never opened since. You can tell at a glance which shelves are dead. The spines are perfect. And then, on a low table by the fire, the shelf that is actually alive. This year's novels, the reviews, a book on Italian gardens with the pages cut, a bound volume of Punch, and a book about the tariff question with a marker halfway through it. You take the Italian gardens and sit down with it and do not read a word, and listen instead to the rain starting again on the long windows, and to a door closing somewhere 3 rooms away, and to the clock. Sunday arrives quieter than the 2 days before it, and the difference is audible before you are properly awake. There is no crunch of gravel under a dozen pairs of boots at 9:30, no dogs, no voices in the court below your window. The house has changed gear. Your maid brings tea at 8 and lays out what you settled on last night, which is dark and plain and buttoned high, because whatever else Sunday is in a house like this, it is a morning when the entire parish will look at you. The church stands at the edge of the park, 5 minutes through a gate in the wall and along a path of flagstones sunk into wet grass. Those who wish may drive, and 2 of the older ladies do in the brougham, but most of the party walk in a loose procession with umbrellas, and you walk beside a man who tells you about his sister's house in Norfolk for the whole of it. Inside, the arrangement of bodies tells you everything about the arrangement of the district. The family pew is at the front on the right, boxed, with a small stove of its own, and cushions that belong to nobody else. You and the rest of the visitors are put into it, and the pew behind it. Then the farmers who rent land from the estate, in order of the size of their holdings, though nobody has written that order down in 100 years. Then the village. Then, at the very back and along the north aisle where the cold comes in, the servants of the house in their Sunday black, the housekeeper at the head of one row, and the butler at the head of another, having walked down by the back path in a body 20 minutes before you. You are sitting in a diagram. Everyone in the building can read it. This is worth slowing down for, because the parish church is the last piece of an older arrangement still standing in plain sight in 1908, and it works differently from anything else in the weekend. The living, which means the right to appoint the man who stands in that pulpit, belongs to the family. It is property. It descends with the estate, and it can be sold, and it has been sold, though not by these people. Somewhere in the muniment room there is a document that says so. When the last vicar died, your host's father wrote to a young man he had met at Oxford and offered it to him, and the young man accepted, and that is how the parish got the voice it has been listening to for 22 years. His income is about £300 a year, which comes partly from the glebe, the land attached to the living, and partly from tithe rent charge, which is what remains of the old right to 1/10 of the parish's produce after it was commuted into a money payment. £300 is a strange sum. It is 4 or 5 times what the head housemaid at the house earns in wages, and it is less than a quarter of what the family will spend keeping this weekend fed and lit. It puts him, precisely, nowhere. That nowhere is the whole of his social position. He is a gentleman, and he dines at the house perhaps twice a month, and he is asked to make up numbers when a guest fails. He is not asked this weekend. His wife makes over her own dresses, and does it well enough that you would not know unless you looked at the seams, which you did at the door without meaning to. He is expected to know every family in the village, and to be sorry with them and glad with them, and he is expected at the same time never to make the family at the house uncomfortable. He preaches for 11 minutes on the parable of the talents. He does it well. He does not once look at the boxed pew. Afterwards there is the business at the porch, which takes longer than the sermon. Your hostess speaks to the vicar's wife, and to 2 of the tenants' wives, and to an old woman who worked in the still room in the last century, and is now bent nearly double. And she does it in that particular register, warm and precise, that takes years to learn, and no time at all to get wrong. She asks after names. She remembers a son in the Navy. She is working, and it looks like nothing, and by the time you are all walking back through the wet grass she has held together for another week, the idea that the house at the end of the park is part of the place, rather than merely standing in it. Luncheon on Sunday is cold, and this is not an accident or an economy. It is the one arrangement in the week designed to reduce the labor below stairs. The joints were cooked yesterday. There is a raised pie, a ham, a tongue, a galantine, salads, a great bowl of trifle, cheese, and hothouse fruit, and it is all laid out along the sideboard at 1:30 for people to take as they like, with 2 footmen rather than 4, and the housemaid's not required at all. The kitchen has produced breakfast and will produce dinner, and in between it has an afternoon. What that afternoon actually amounts to is the servants' half-day, and it is worth being accurate about it rather than sentimental. In a well-run house, the staff have Sunday afternoon and evening free, in rotation, which means about half of them at a time, and 1 full day a month, and a fortnight in the year. On paper, the free afternoon runs from 2 until 10. In practice, the housemaids must be back to turn down the beds and carry cans of hot water at 7, and the kitchen must produce dinner regardless, and the footman must wait at it. So on a house-party weekend, the half-day is thinner still. 2 of the younger maids walk into the village to see family. One goes to the afternoon service. The rest stay in the servants' hall and write letters and sleep sitting up, because there is nowhere else in the county they could reach and return from in the hours available, and because they have been on stone floors since 5:30. Freedom that must be spent within 2 miles of the place you are free from is a particular kind of freedom. It is genuinely better than nothing. It is not much more than that. At 3, the rain thins to a drizzle, and then stops, and the party drifts out to walk in the gardens, which on a Sunday is what there is to do. The formal beds are past their best, and have been cut back, but the head gardener has been at this place for 19 years, and the glass houses are his real argument. There are 7 of them along the south wall, heated by their own boiler and their own boy, and inside the air hits you like a wet cloth after the November garden. Grapes first, black and dusty with bloom, cut with a length of stem, and a little bottle of water tied on so they will keep. Then peaches trained flat against a back wall. Then a house of carnations for the table, and one of ferns, and at the end, in the hottest of them, the pineapples. 9 of them in pots in tan bark, sunk in heat. Each takes about 2 years, from a sucker to a fruit. Each requires that boiler stoked through every night of 2 winters, and the coal for that boiler is carted from the station, and a gardener who understands pineapples is paid accordingly, and the whole apparatus exists so that on perhaps 6 evenings a year, a pineapple can be carried into the dining room whole and set down in front of 14 people who will each eat 2 mouthfuls of it. Work out what the fruit costs by the pound, and the figure becomes ridiculous, which is exactly the point of it. Anyone in the district can buy a pineapple imported from the West Indies for a few shillings. Nobody in the district can grow one. The expense is not a side effect of the display. The expense is the display. You say something of this to the head gardener, who is walking you along the peach house with his hands behind his back, and he agrees, and then tells you the boiler wants replacing, and has wanted replacing for 4 years. And there it is again, the whole weekend in miniature, the fruit at one end, and the deferred boiler at the other. Later you sit on a stone bench at the end of the yew walk with a woman you have known since you were both 19. And she tells you, without any particular tone, that they have let the house. Not sold. Let furnished for 3 years to a man who has done extremely well out of chemicals, and they will take a flat in London and a small place in Scotland for the summer. And the boys will stay at their school because the fees have been managed. She says the rent is nearly 900 a year, and the house was costing them more than that to keep open. So the arithmetic was not really an argument, only a date. You ask the sensible questions. Whether the servants have been kept on, and most have, with the new tenant, which is the part she minds least. Whether her mother-in-law knows, which she does, and which has been the worst of it. Whether they will go back, which she does not answer. What has happened to her is not a misfortune particular to her. Wheat has been coming in cheaply for 30 years. Rents have fallen and fallen again. And there is a whole class of families in this country whose entire visible life rests on land income that no longer covers the visible life. Some of them marry money. Some sell outlying farms one at a time and say nothing. Some let the house to a man who made his in chemicals and take a flat. She is not ruined. She is rearranged, and she will be at somebody's dinner in London in February, in the same emeralds, and only a dozen people will know, and 11 of them will have their own version. The light goes early. Somewhere behind the yews, a bell is being rung for the servants' tea, and you both stand up and shake out your skirts and walk back toward the lit windows. You wake on Monday to the sound of your own trunks. Not the sound of them being moved, exactly, but the particular flat noise a trunk lid makes when it is set back against a wall, and the small clicking of straps being drawn through their buckles, and under all of it, the low burr of your maid working quickly in a room that is already half yours and half nobody's. She has been up since 6. The fire has been lit and allowed to burn low rather than built, because the room will be cold and empty by 11, and there is no sense in warming it for the housemaid who will strip it. The tea comes at 7:30 instead of 8, which is a message. Everything about a Monday morning in a house of this kind is a message delivered without anybody having to say a word. The dresses you wore on Friday and Saturday have been pressed and folded with paper laid in the sleeves, and the one you will travel in is hanging on the wardrobe door, and the boots you walked out to the shoot in have been cleaned twice, once by the hall boy on Saturday evening, and once again by your maid this morning, because she did not think much of the hall boy's work. The room is being disassembled around you with great courtesy while you drink your tea. You dress for the train. Tweed, sensible, warm, plain enough that a station will not stare at it. The whole complicated architecture of the past 3 days folds down into one travelling costume and a hat that will survive being sat under for 2 hours. And then there is the part of the morning nobody in the drawing room will ever describe, and which every guest in England has thought about at some point since Saturday. You have to tip the servants. This is called giving veils, and it is one of the strangest surviving customs of the whole system, and it is genuinely and openly hated by almost everyone required to do it. You are a guest. You have been fed and housed and waited on for 3 days by people who are paid by somebody else, and nevertheless it is understood, absolutely and without any written rule anywhere, that on leaving you will hand out money to a specific list of individuals in specific amounts that nobody will tell you, and that you are expected to already know. Here is what it actually comes to. The butler, or whoever has been in charge of the men, gets the most, and for a 3-night stay in a house of this size that is 10 shillings, and it might be more if you had come with a husband who shot, which yours did not this time. The head housemaid who has looked after your room gets 5 shillings. The footman who carried your trunks up and has stood behind your chair at dinner 4 times gets 5 shillings, sometimes half a crown if you are stretched, though half a crown is noticed. There is the hall boy, and there is the odd man, and there is the lamp boy if the house has one. If you have been driven anywhere, the coachman or the chauffeur is owed something, and if the guns went out, and you went out to them, there is the head keeper, who does very well indeed out of a shooting weekend and expects to. Add it up honestly, and a modest 3-night visit to a house like this costs you somewhere near £2 in tips alone. Add the railway fare, first class because you cannot arrive any other way. Add your maid's fare, Third class. Add what you paid the dressmaker in September, so that you would have 4 things to wear a day, and not repeat. £2 is a month of a housemaid's wages, handed out at a front door in coins, by a woman who has been telling people all weekend that she does not concern herself with money. There is a whole small literature of complaint about this. Men write letters to the papers about it. Guests of moderate means genuinely decline invitations because of it, and everybody understands perfectly well why, and nobody says so out loud. The custom persists because it functions as a filter. It quietly and effectively excludes anyone who cannot absorb the cost, which is exactly what a system of this kind is built to do, and it does it without a single person ever having to be unkind to anybody's face. You have the coins ready. You sorted them last night, in an envelope by name, because arriving downstairs and fumbling silver out of a purse in front of a footman is the sort of small failure people remember. The handing over is done quickly and quietly, in a corridor or at the foot of the back stairs, and the correct manner is warm but brief, and the correct response from the servant is a thank you and nothing else. No counting, no glance downward. Both of you are extremely good at this. Neither of you enjoys it. The butler gets his in the hall, and he takes it as though you had passed him a message rather than money, and he says he hopes you have a comfortable journey, and he means it about as much as anyone means anything at 10:30 on a Monday. Then you say goodbye to your hostess. She is in the morning room with the lists. There are always lists. The next party comes on Friday, and there are 12 of them, and 2 are cousins who cannot be seated near each other. And there is a shortage of men, which is a permanent structural crisis in Edwardian hospitality, and she has already written to a colonel in Shropshire to fix it. She looks perfectly rested, and she has been awake since 7, going through the game book and the cellar book, and the housekeeper's accounts for the week, because 18 people eating 4 meals a day for 3 days leaves a paper trail, and somebody settles it. You thank her. She says it was such a pleasure, and that you must come in the spring, and that she is so glad you and the woman with the emeralds had a proper talk, which tells you she arranged it. Of course she arranged it. She arranged every conversation you had for 3 days, including the ones you thought were accidents. And here is the thing that should be said plainly before you leave the room. What she has done this weekend is a piece of work. She has run an establishment of 30-odd people at full stretch for 3 days. She has managed a menu across 9 major meals without a repeat, a bedroom allocation that told 16 people their exact social value without anyone being able to object to it, a seating plan renegotiated twice, a shooting day, a church party, a sick child upstairs on Saturday that you only learned about on Sunday, and the delicate placing of a young woman near an eligible man 4 separate times in a way that looked to everybody present like chance. Nobody will call any of that work. She will not call it work. If you asked her directly, she would laugh and say she does nothing at all. The servants do everything. And she would say it in a tone that made it impossible to press. The wagonette is at the door. Your trunks are already on it, roped, counted, 5 again, as they were on Friday. Your maid is up beside the driver, with her own small case, and a face that says she will sleep on the train and be right about having done so. The gravel, the turn, the avenue. You look back once, because everybody looks back once, and the house does what those houses are designed to do, which is to sit very still and appear permanent. It is not still. Behind those windows, before your wheels are off the drive, the housemaids are already stripping your bed. The sheets are going down to the laundry, the grate is being raked out, the hot water can is being carried back down, the writing table is being restocked, and by 4 o'clock this afternoon, there will be no evidence at all that you were ever in that room. That is the point of the room. That is the point of the whole machine. It absorbs people and leaves no mark. And it does so because 40-odd people at various levels of the building spend their days making certain of it. So hold both of these things at once, because both of them are true. You are good at this. Genuinely, professionally good. You knew the precedents. You knew when to turn at dinner. You knew what to say to a keeper's wife, and what to say to a duchess, and how those two things differ. You read a room in 4 seconds. You handled a woman losing her house in a way that left her dignity entirely intact. Your hostess ran an institution. The housekeeper ran a department. The cook produced work of a standard that a London restaurant would have charged extravagantly for. Every woman in that building, on both sides of the bay's door, was skilled. And the system these skills served did not name any of it as skill. It called it charm, or nature, or duty, or simply nothing at all. It paid the women below stairs a fraction of what it paid the men beside them. It gave the women above stairs no income of their own, no vote, and no standing that did not come through a husband, and it would erase you entirely, quietly, within 1 season, if the money went. As it went for your friend, who is not ruined, only rearranged, and who will need every one of those same skills in February to walk into a room in London and let nobody see it. That is not a complaint about anybody in that house. It is a description of the structure they all lived inside, and none of them designed. The branch line train is waiting, and it smells of coal again, the same as Friday, exactly the same. You take your seat. The fields go long and low and gold outside the glass, and the hedges run away behind, and your gloves lie folded in your lap, one on top of the other, quite still.